Nevaeh Shiji Denvershin Nasha, Shelapen de Chasha Nasha. So, hello, my name is Nevaeh Ramon. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I am Lapon Apache from the Chasha Sun Otter Clan. I am very excited and honored to be here today. Um, I am currently in my third year here at MSU as a history major, and I'm very thankful for the people who we will be hearing from and talking to today, who are working to support Indigenous students. Because of people like them, I'm currently a leading member of the Native Indigenous Student Alliance. I work on the powwow committee here for our annual powwow that we throw, as well as I'm a research assistant for the Indian Child Welfare Act. So thankful for all the people who are working to support us Indigenous students and scholars. So for this panel, we are going to be talking to three professionals in this field, and it's a critical dialogue series based off of conversations we've been having about building successful programming for our Native and Indigenous student support services, which is, as we know, an extremely important program here on campus. And so if our panelists would like to introduce themselves and give a brief overview um, of what you do, and we can start with Karen Diver here.
Pujuanin, Karen Diver Nindijaka, Zaganashimang, Makwan Nindodem, Dagachi Wenang Nindujaba. Karen Diver, I am a citizen of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, here in northern Minnesota, where today we broke the record for snowiest winter ever, which isn't the record I wanted to break, but it's snowing again on April 20th. And I am the senior advisor to the president at the University of Minnesota for Native American Affairs. I'm a member of the president's senior leadership team, report directly to her, President Joan Gable. Throughout my career, I've had a number of different roles. Probably most relevant to this discussion would be that I was chairwoman of the Fond du Lac Band, the head elected official for almost 9 years, managing the reservation and government official. And then I was in the Barack Obama White House as his special assistant for Native American Affairs. Been in higher ed for about 6 years. And I should probably be clear that while I might be employed by the University of Minnesota, I view my job as to serve tribes and Indigenous people.
And we can go to Michelle Frazier next.
Geritala Simama Ishi A Michelle Villegas-Frazier, A Hintil Pomo Shabu Yakaya. So what I said is good afternoon. My name is Michelle Villegas-Frazier. I am from I'm Pomo from Panolaville Reservation in Yakaya, California. So my tribal homelands are about 2.5 hours north of San Francisco. So I'm from University of California, Davis. The positions, I wear many hats on campus, and like most Native students, Native staff or faculty, we have these many hats. One of those hats is I am the executive director for the Academic Retention Initiatives, and these are 4 initiatives that are looking at the matriculation and graduation rates are historically marginalized students, so African American, Chicanx, and Latinx, Native American, and Asian and Pacific Islanders. So I oversee those 4 initiatives, as well as the director of our Native American Retention Initiative. So responsible for creating space, programs, and services to make sure our Native students graduate in a timely manner, as well as the third hat I wear is I am one of the champions of our grand challenges. So UC Davis is overseeing 4 different grand challenges, climate control, food systems, and health equities. And the 4th one being reimagining a land grant university. So along with one of our faculty as the champions to ensure that our campus, UC Davis is a land grant university, and it acknowledges the harm and historical trauma that it's done in being a land grant university, and then how do we as a university move beyond that and provide opportunities and support for our Native and Indigenous communities that the university has impacted. I've been in higher ed for this is my 30th year. at UC Davis and in different capacities, was in admissions and outreach, worked for the School of Medicine and their diversity programs, and now currently working as executive director and champion for our campus. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, Laurie, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Why Haskell-Cast, Isquis Laurie Arnold, Kinsinakes, Call the Confederated Tribes, Kin Mihum, or Native American Studies, or Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. I am Laurie Arnold. I am a historian. I received my PhD at Arizona State University, and I am back in the region where I grew up. The Cabo Reservation is about 2.5 hours from Spokane, here where I'm located, where Gonzaga University is located on contemporary and ancestral lands of the Spokane Tribe of Indians, land that was also shared with the Coeur d'Alene tribe and with Plateau tribes as a gathering place and a place of movement and connection. This is my 10th year at Gonzaga. I am the inaugural director of the academic program, Native American Studies. It did not exist prior to my hire. And so the work that I've been doing in the last 10 years is to get the program embedded in the university. Our foundation is tribal sovereignty, and the fundamental recognition of tribes as nations. So we have a race and ethnic studies program here on campus, and the Native American Studies program does not cross-list with that program because tribes are nations. We are not simply one race among many. Native American Studies is a standalone minor, so we have all of our own course numbering designations. We cross-list most of our courses. Almost all of our courses fulfill the university core requirements in one way or another. And so in that way, that is an approach to making this minor visible, accessible, and relevant for all students, in addition to serving as an academic and intellectual space where Native students and other students can come to understand contemporary Native lives, experiences, and the Native pasts.
Thank you so much, Laurie, and to all three of our panelists for introducing themselves. And now I'd like to introduce Desiree Richards, who is our Native Indigenous Student Support Initiatives Coordinator here at MSU.
Okay. Apatu my name is Desiree Richards. I don't have a wonderful introduction quite like these ladies here. Not yet, anyways. But my name is Desiree Richards, and I'm the program coordinator for Native and Indigenous Student Support Initiatives here at MSU Denver. Just a little bit of background information. I'm going to kind of talk fast because we are on like a time with our panelists. So I actually graduated from MSU Denver last year in May. Was a student here. I came here, transferred from CCA in 2019. And when I first came here, I was part of this. I was a part of the TRIO program, and I kind of asked them like, "Hey, do you guys have any like Native organizations here? Anything for Native students?" And my advisor just kind of told me, "No, we don't, but maybe that's something that you can start." And I'm like, "I'm a mom. Like, I have a lot going on." So there really wasn't anything initially when I came, and I kind of was just like had my head in the books. I'm a mother too, and just working at the same time. And then it was like during the pandemic, and we got an email from a graduate assistant asking if we wanted to start a Native student organization here at MSU Denver. And it was myself and 4 other women who kind of responded and were like, "Yeah, we would love to start something like that here." And that's kind of how ANISA came to be here, Native Indigenous Student Alliance, that Nevaeh is part of now. And it was really to build space and to really build a system where we had support. Just because whenever I went to school here, I really felt like I didn't belong in this institution. I felt like I didn't see myself anywhere. I felt like I didn't have any connections with faculty or staff just because there was no representation. Um, and I really was at a point too during the, COVID, all of us, going through things. My brother was sick at the time, and, just really not wanting to finish school. And NISA, that group of ladies, was really what kept me going. That community, having the people that I could go to and vent to and talk to about these things and just support one another is really what kept me a student and what kept me to graduate, honestly. And then I ended up standing up to be a leader last year, 2021. Something I was not expecting to do, but I also just really, I've always been really passionate about who I am as a Native woman. I really love my people. I love our people. I love our ways. I love who we are. I love how, we engage and just, um, I've always been passionate, and then just passionate about social justice. And, as a student, really bringing to the forefront at this university, like educational events to really talk about Indigenous, our communities, things that we are currently going through, because we're not just in textbooks, we're not just in museums, like we are still here and we are still thriving and we are taking up spaces in many areas. And so starting that as a student and then transitioning to like this staff member, I was pretty crazy and very ambitious. Let's just say that, because I ended up organizing our first powwow last year, last semester as a senior, my senior semester. And, I was crazy because a lot of times powwows are supposed to be done in like a year. Like they're supposed to have a year planning. I did it in 2.5 months, and the institution was really able to help us out. We ended up raising like $19,000 to be able to support that powwow. It was really just great to see a teepee in downtown Denver. It was great to be able to have that on this campus. That representation of our culture and our people, it was very powerful. And I couldn't be more proud, because I think it really helped a lot of students, not only myself, but a lot of students. And so that's just a little bit of background information. I'm going to go into my PowerPoint. Do you want to press the space bar for me, please? So we have Nevaeh. Thank you, Nevaeh. She's also our co-facilitator today. Go ahead. And our wonderful speakers. And so I just wanted to talk about a little bit of the enrollment numbers on what I have. So in fall of 2022, we had 334 self-identifying Native students here at MSU Denver. This spring, we have 969 that self-identify as Native. And that might not be reflected in other data that we might see that's rolled out through the institution, right? And it's just because the way that data is collected, both state and federally. And that's another conversation for another panel, another day. But and so for the spring and summer, we have 1,013 students that are going to be here at MSU Denver. And I just wanted to give context, because 54 of those students out of that 1,013 are going to be graduating this spring. And there's more students that are registering for the summertime, and there's more students who are going to be coming in the fall time. So I want to really bring to light that our numbers are going up. Now that we have implemented that IMPG, that's an opportunity for our people to come here and to really get their higher education, to get opportunities that they couldn't pursue before. So I just really wanted to bring that to the forefront, that like our population is growing here at MSU Denver, and that's something to be proud of and something to recognize. And this is why we have this event today, because we need to build out successful programming to support these students. Because yes, now that we have them here, what are we going to do to make sure that they, stay here and make sure that they are successful and they graduate?
All right. So now we are going to let our panelists kind of educate us all. And so some of the things that we are going to be talking about are: how can student affairs continue to offer their wraparound support for Native students with support from academic affairs? Okay, and if our panelists would like to, if anyone would like to answer that question specifically. How can student affairs continue to offer their wraparound support for Native students with support from an academic affairs?
Right. So I could talk a little bit about the structure we have here at Davis. So the program that I oversee is the Native American Retention Initiative, and we are, again, an initiative that's working on, admissions and outreach, retention, and graduation. So the goal is to get our students in and get them out in a timely manner. And to do that, it takes an ecosystem of support, not just from student affairs, not from tutoring and the health center. It's the whole campus supporting our initiatives. So it's the campus understanding who our Native students are, and to understand that there is 500 plus tribal nations. And also here in California, we have 109 state recognized tribes, as well as 34 unrecognized tribes. So really starting from understanding who our Native communities are, and that's beyond just the Indigenous, because there's also an Indigenous folks that are in our institutions as well. And so looking at who our Native folks are, and I know you talked about the data and the numbers and trying to figure out what the true data is on your student population, because then you have a student population that is self-identified, that may or may not be Native, or who just learned they're 18 and learned that they're Native. So it's complex and complicated for our community. So really trying to understand our community and where we come from, and then thinking about this ecosystem of support from internally from campus, academic affairs, undergraduate education, the health center, um, as well as external, because we don't do that. We do this work, but we do it in a community, and sometimes those communities are from outside resources. So at Davis, like I mentioned, we have the Native American Retention Initiative, and in my center, because I do have a space, we have a team that supports our students. Myself, a director, an associate director, and we're full time. We're full time and permanently funded. So that is another big thing. The people that we have here need to be 100% and not just going out trying to find funds for their jobs, but have the campus committed to these positions, as well as we have a counselor that's embedded in our space to help with the social emotional support of our students. And then we have people from the Career Center as well as academic advisors within our spaces to support the students. So again, having this ecosystem of support to ensure that our students graduate or be successful in different ways. I'll let the other panelists answer.
How do we connect Native Student Support Services with the academic life of the campus? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, this I think is a question that every university struggles with, because I think what often happens with universities is that there's academics and then there's students. And in our case, there's also athletics. And so those are essentially three different pots. And sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. And sometimes I think universities say that they want more overlap between those units, and really they don't want to see that, because that keeps us in competition with each other, in competition for resources, in competition for access. For example, at Gonzaga, the student support division has grown, I think, by massive amounts in the last 5 years. And the academic side hasn't seen growth like that. And more worrisome for the academic side is that we are not getting as many tenure track positions, but instead are reliant on short-term lecturers or adjunct labor. And that means that as a university focused on social justice, that we're not actually achieving social justice for faculty to get into tenure track positions where they're protected by academic freedom and by the possibility of building a career at the university. So those are some of the complexities that our university is dealing with in general when we think about academics and student support. At our university, it's a residential campus, and so students are really focused on services, on social opportunities, on student clubs, some co-curricular activities, but really it's more about the social lives of that 4-year residential experience. This is where students who are first generation, who are Native, who come from other underrepresented populations can feel isolated in this university campus. We're a predominantly white institution. We have about annually, we have between 80 and 100 students who identify as Native. That is also a self-identification process. Like Michelle mentioned at Davis, these are students who may not know their community, may not know if they're connected to a community, and are learning for the first time how to understand their identity as Native people. So then at the same time, so Gonzaga is located in the midst of 4 reservations. So the Spokane Reservation, of course, is, these are their homelands. They're nearest to us, the Kalispell Reservation. So the Spokane tribe has, I think, around 4,000 tribal citizens. The Kalispell tribe is quite small at a few hundred. The Coeur d'Alene tribe in Idaho is about the same size as the Spokane tribe, and the Colville tribe, which is slightly further away is about 10,000 citizens, about half of whom live on the reservation. So the students coming from the local reservation communities and the urban Spokane community understand themselves in ways that are different from students who are for the first time exploring their Native identity. And so part of our role in the Native American Studies program is to make Native experiences, Native histories, Native intellectual work, contemporary Native American lives and leadership like Karen's, like what goes on at NCAI, ATNI, all of the work that Secretary Holland is doing in her division, make that visible not only to students, but to our peers and to our colleagues and to our bosses. And so I think lots of us, I'm going to generalize, even though I always caution students against generalization, I think lots of us who work in Native academic work, Native student support work, any work that touches Native people, Native lives, we spend a lot of time educating our bosses. We spend a lot of time educating our institutions. The simple assertion that tribes are nations is very confusing for some reason. Uh, and so as much time as I spend thinking about my work in the classroom, I also spend a lot of time talking to my colleagues about, well, this is why the trope of the white savior is problematic. For example, I had that conversation last week. Um, so I don't engage explicitly in student support. I'm not involved in helping resolve RA conflicts or roommate conflicts. Um, I work more at that bigger picture. Here's why a Native student might need to be gone for 2 weeks for a ceremony. Um, and having conversations with our student support system as a faculty member, when students miss a lot of class, my concern is not about the attendance policy and the university policy of attendance, but my concern is, why is that student missing class? In what ways does that student need support? And how can we navigate these questions about accommodation and accountability, right? So we want to support students as they need to be away, but we also need to remind them that they're accountable in these academic spaces and that the work they're doing at college is important and that it matters, because we need all of us to fill up all of these spaces. And getting a college degree is one path to being able to do that.
I think my role has kind of elements of both. I don't do a lot of direct service with students, but those departments count on me to help them problem solve. So I'm more into the institutional work of how do we embed all of these practices across the 5 campuses of the University of Minnesota, all which are very different. We had a real lack of capacity. It's really easy for Native student support services to take a hit when budgets are tight. And so, my job is to point out to them that, don't tell me your values are diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's the first place you go for a hit is the most disadvantaged population. Yes, I do it with a lot of judgment, and maybe a little look at the same time. In other words, we see you, right? But I'm also facilitating those conversations between tribal leadership, the 11 tribes in the state, and the president of the university, where they can say they see what's happening too. Now, luckily, over the last, 4 to 5 years under President Gable, sh and my last 2 years here, she's kinda let me run, and so we're finally at full staff on our Duluth campus, which has the second highest Native population. The Twin Cities campus is being pulled out of multicultural studies. It got absorbed into that at one point. It didn't have a director. It couldn't advocate. It was, and once, much like Laurie said, our students deserve this service because of their their identity and their citizenship in a nation, not necessarily based on their race and political status. The racism and the institutional bias comes because of their race and culture, but our duty to them as institutions is based on their citizenship in their nation. So we're going to get a director now for the student support services on the Twin Cities campus, and elevate that position so that they have more ability to stabilize and advocate for themselves, their budget, all of those things. The Morris campus is unique in that it was a boarding school that closed, and then at some point, that campus was given to the University of Minnesota. So we acquired it after it was closed, but it has that legacy, right? But with that came a tuition waiver that was perpetual. It was a condition of the property, and it can also serve descendants as well. Um, so it actually has enough Native students to be designated as a Native American serving institution. So they have a very robust community and a highly developed advisory board. They have an elder in residence. They have a Native student advisory group, and so they have community there. And so their recruitment and retention happens much easier there. Because they've just gotten good at it. It's a part of what they do. So trying to take the lessons learned from that campus and say, how can we replicate them? Has the oldest Native American Studies department in the country, but much like a lot of these things, it wanes, right? It's strong at some point, and it just kind of, just always seems to be fluctuating. And they've benefited from some resources lately, through some Mellon Foundation money, and they started a Dakota language house and an Ojibwe language house. And the Twin Cities was a relocation center, so large and vibrant. It was the birthplace of the American Indian movement, so it has a large and vibrant Native American urban community where those students can remain in community and attend the University of Minnesota. The biggest issue I've been facing is, everybody wants to recruit. They love the diversity numbers. But when you talk to them about support services, that's a harder conversation. They think that should be an institutional responsibility. And my point is it should be everybody's responsibility. And if you are successful as a college in your recruitment, you need to build some of that support system, not in a center that's over there, but also within your piece of the institution. If it's engineering or whatever, dedicate some of that staff time for them to navigate, excuse me, your program and the academic side and problem solve and do some of that work of have someone to speak for them where they might run into a teacher that they don't mesh with or that doesn't understand the need to take off time because of family issues or ceremony or traditional activities, that they start to build that cultural competency within their unit and not devolve all of that to a centralized function. Somebody who knows the professors and the deans and, the financial aid officers and all of those types of things. So basically what I'm saying is institutional capacity. It does no good to have one person advising the president, because if I get hit by a bus, it all goes with me, right? So I'm really pushing for that institutional capacity within each of our colleges, both to do the tribal liaison work and hear directly from tribal leaders about what their workforce development needs, what they're hearing from their learners. About their experiences, but then also build that capacity to manage research, free, prior, and informed consent, advisory boards, things like that within each of our units.
Thank you for those very informative answers. And I just like around the concept of, I feel like some institutions, a lot of them are gearing towards like MSI institutions or HSI. And a lot of people don't talk about like the native serving institutions, right? And in order for you to be an institution like that, you need about like 10% of your populations to be native students. And so here, that's like the basic requirement, right? But here at MSU Denver, we have, I believe, like 18,000, right? Am I correct on that or no? Maybe. So then that means we need at least like what 1,700, Native students, and we could be considered, a Native serving institution. But I'm gonna go ahead and let Nevaeh go on to. Do we want to do the audience question? Yeah, let's just do that. Does anybody have any questions for them?
So I actually came to MSU from ASU. I went out there for my freshman year. Um, it was cool, but it wasn't home. And then I actually came home to do, like, I guess in a sense online, and it just wasn't working for me. I cannot do online school. Like, COVID threw me off just because I'm an in-person learner. And I feel like my question more so is, how do I advocate to the president, to the institution, just in general for in-person classes? Because I'm actually an Indigenous grant student. I started in the spring. And I was looking forward to coming to the institution, learning. I actually am majoring in Chicano studies and I'm minoring in Native American studies. And I was looking forward to having these intellectual conversations. I have a lot of them in my Chicano studies classes, but all of my coursework for my Native American minor is online. And I get that the institution, the department in itself isn't that big. It doesn't have a lot of exposure, but at the same time, I don't feel like we have enough professors in the degree in itself. I don't feel like we don't even have enough spaces. I've learned a lot more in my classes with the Chicano studies, having classes and conversations with my peers, but I don't get that same intellectual conversation when it comes to my Native American studies. I find myself just answering discussions and replying, but I'm not having actual insight to it. So I do the work because I'm interested in the work I'm doing, but if it was something that I wasn't interested in doing, I wouldn't do it. But I feel like it's more so because of my learning capabilities. So I like learning in person. So I'm just kind of like figuring out, how do we advocate for that? Because the Chicano Studies department isn't that big either. We don't have a lot. Like, I know all of my professors pretty much, and I know the department chair. So it's like, it's not that big. She's right here, actually. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's not a big department, yet I still get that with them being a smaller institution or a smaller department. So how do I advocate that for Native American studies being able to have that? Because even though it's small, it doesn't mean that you can't bring awareness by offering it in person. So I'm just kind of like trying to figure out how to do that, because I would really love to have. I mean, I graduate in a year, so it probably won't happen by the time I'm here, but at least to spread the message and get the word out that this is necessary and it's essential to the degree in itself.
I'm really sorry that you had to go through all of that. I mean, one of the nice things about, Native American studies classes is that's where our learners find their people, right? Because they're not going to find them in their other classes. We're Western-based institution and we teach Western-based knowledge, and our peoples aren't as integrated into the pedagogy of all of these other disciplines the way that they should be. But that's a whole one. Maybe that's another panel too, Desiree. Um, but anyway, so, one of the alternatives you could offer is, offer it hybrid, where some people in the room so that you can meet your peers anyway. But one way that really gets the notice at the University of Minnesota is having student groups take action and pass resolutions and bringing them up through the chain. And you could also ask your faculty to advocate through any faculty shared governance models. And then if you have any access to any tribal organizations, if they could write letters on behalf of it as well. And that language of, this is where we find community and find home. It's the one class we can go to where we don't have to talk about our indigeneity and be a teacher at the same time. We can just be a learner. And this is the place that makes us feel like we have a home on this campus.
Yeah, I just like to add, at Davis, we have a Native American Indigenous Advisory Committee to the Chancellor. So this is a student-led and student-run committee that reports directly to the Chancellor. It's like a main organization. Usually they're run by staff and faculty, but this is the only student run and student led. And on that committee are student leaders, faculty, staff, and administration. So the provost sits on it, a couple deans of the colleges. And so it's really a committee. They meet a couple times a year. We also have alumni and tribal people sit on the committee too. And so it's really discussing, and they are leading those questions to the chancellor on how do we do this? How do we do a land acknowledgement? What we're past that already, but all those different issues they bring to the chancellor. So that has been a one way to get those points to our upper level executive leadership.
Because we're a residential campus, all of our classes for undergraduates are in person with an occasional exception. So during COVID, we were fully remote for one semester, and then most classes were offered hybrid in that second semester, and we came back fully in person in the fall. So that is related to our accreditation is also connected to the number of classes that we can offer online, and for undergraduates, that's very small. So Gonzaga is a slightly different situation than a state university because we're a private university. But I think that both of the suggestions from both Karen and Michelle are offer effective ways for students to assert their needs, and also for alumni and tribes to step in and say, this is how you need to support our students. If you say that you want to support our students and they're telling you how you can do that.
Thank you. And I believe we have one more question from a student.
Um, thank you, first of all, for taking time out of your very incredibly busy schedules to do this for us. We really appreciate it. So I'm a student here at MSU Denver that I'm involved in many different things, including student government. And I guess my question is, I'm a STEM major, so I get very it's like re-traumatized over and over again in all these classes, right? Where they're continually putting these words like ecology, biology, anatomy, environmental conservation, all these things that have to be put into subcategories in order to like fulfill the specialty that a student wants to go into, right? But in reality, it's just the stewardship of the land that we've been doing since the beginning of time, right? Since the beginning of our existence. So it's decolonizing those methodologies, which I'm reading a book that one of my professors, suggested to me, and it's a lot. So it's a lot. There's a lot of big words. um, but I really want to try to do that. I want to go into traditional ecological knowledge, but I also want to stay on the social justice sides of things by land restoration through an indigenous perspective, showing people that we've had the knowledge to redo and do conservation for the earth, right? So I understand that it's a long, tedious process. I think I spoke with somebody at San Diego State University, and developing their Native Studies program there took them, I think they said 12 years. And how they did it was to implement Indigenous studies in every single department. But my question here is, what do we create first? The demand for these studies, or do we create the staff for these studies first, and the syllabuses and all that? Because it's almost like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? What do we get first? Do we get our numbers up first? Do we get our student support up first? Do we get our academics around Indigenous studies up first? Like, do you have any suggestions for a framework to follow? I understand this is going to take time, and I may not be here well after, but it'd be really cool to get a framework started for this institution to start following, so they can't say, well, you didn't really give us anything, you know?
Thank you for that question. So my answer, so I get a lot of pushback when I'm talking to the deans about, increasing their offerings that would be desired by our Native learners. And a part of the argument that these types of institutions will learn is that there's not a critical mass of numbers to make the investment up front. And my retort back to them is usually, you're making the assumption that students who are not Native won't benefit from this type of pedagogy as well. And certainly in this day and age around like traditional ecological knowledge, they're interested in it from a scientific perspective because it thinks it will help them save the planet that they already ruined, right? But what they don't understand is higher ed has been so incredibly extractive from Native American communities that we don't trust them. We don't trust them that they won't try to monetize it. They won't try to trademark it. I mean, my own institution, I give them a hard time constantly because they trademarked an apple. And I was like, what's wrong with you people? An apple is food, and we're going to tell you traditional ecological knowledge. Next thing you'll be sticking a patent on it and trying to make money off of it because that's what you value. We know this about you. So you need to understand what motivates them. And so definitely that kind of DEI card, but also pointing out that the whole conservation movement was built on the back of stealing more Indian land, right? So now they're going to save the planet doing 30 by 30 and, conserving 30% of the world. And what are they doing? They're kicking indigenous peoples in other countries off of their lands, right? Um, so my point is in all of this, I'm telling you things you already know, probably, as somebody who's a professional in the field and learning. But you need to hold a mirror up to them and tell them that what they're missing isn't just the knowledge from indigenous peoples, it's the values that we bring to how we look at it. And if we are going to decolonize our pedagogy, it isn't just using new words and new things. It's the way that our communities value those things. And they need to shift that paradigm away from what is valued in majority culture. That all being said, there's some great programs who have figured this out. Bemidji State in northern Minnesota did a traditional. They're offering actually, I think, a degree program based on traditional knowledges and natural resources and environmentalism. And I know that University of Minnesota Duluth is doing a tribal natural resource managers program. So anyway, I think there's progress, but the argument back is it isn't a chicken and an egg. It is about diversifying your pedagogy as much as you want to diversify your student body.
So I will say it's not an either or discussion. It's everything together. And part of Gonzaga's, we had a new, we didn't used to have a provost. We used to have an academic vice president. And then we moved to a provost model a few years ago. And that first provost worked, she's Chicana, and she worked very diligently to hire deans from underrepresented communities. And the deans in turn worked to hire faculty with who weren't necessarily from underrepresented communities, but could be, and more importantly, faculty who were interested really in embracing interdisciplinarity. So not staying focused in a narrow way on their work, but understanding place as an essential component of their academic lives at Gonzaga. And some people have been more committed to that and some less committed. Part of my role, when I was talking about educating my peers, that's part of my role. So I very often have conversations with the chair of physics to say, hey, here's what the Blackfeet have done with their Indigenous language program, and they're integrating their Blackfeet Salish into the science classroom. So if you want to use these materials in physics classes, reach out to Blackfeet. You can see them online, make sure it's okay. And so I think that a lot of my colleagues are open to that. Just doing that in small ways, just these small interventions, get students used to saying, oh, hey, I wonder how else this is related. And that makes the faculty say, I wonder what else I could do. And that makes the university say, hey, I wonder what else we could do. So it's everyone building this momentum at the same time. That said, we have to be very careful not to add to the already arduous workloads of people who work in Native American studies, of people who, Native staff people who work in Native student support staff, administrators who carry this load for all of us. And we have to be cognizant too of academic freedom. So if a professor of physics says, I don't care about that, that is their prerogative. We might not like it and we might disagree with it, but if their approach to teaching physics is it needs to happen in this order, and if it doesn't happen in this order, the student is not going to be prepared for physics 2 or whatever the course is, we have to respect that. So, like every other approach to building alliances, finding allies who are engaged and interested in that work and ready to learn in a respectful way is key to getting things embedded in the curriculum. So the Native American Studies program at Gonzaga has 17 classes. I only teach 6 or 7 of those. That means that the remaining classes are taught by my colleagues in 6 other departments. We have a review process when faculty want to cross-list a class with us. At least a third of the content has to be by Native authors from Native perspectives, and they are strongly encouraged to invite Native knowledge holders into the classrooms. And Native American Studies has funds to support that. So that is key too, that we aren't just asking our Native knowledge holders to come and work for free for us over and over, but that we invite them and we pay them and we make respectful space in our classrooms for them to do that work instead of just saying, okay, he came, he talked about that, we're going to move on to the next chapter. So there are a lot of things that need to happen. It requires a lot of commitment and a lot of work. It's not work that is tedious, but it is work that requires buy-in for a long time from a lot of people.
I'd like just to comment on the data question, right, and the numbers. And I think higher ed always wants our numbers to increase, but we're not going to have the mass numbers of other communities. It's just not what it is. What we have on our institution is 100% of what we have, and that's what we have to go with. And so when they talk about data, lots of times they'll say we're under 1% or we're an asterisk, right? We're not even part of the data collection. And so there's a really good book called Beyond the Asterisks that addresses this issue and the need to provide support services for whatever students we have, whether it's 2 Native students or 100 Native students. Um, it is the obligation of our higher education institutions, obligation, ethical and moral obligation, to support our students to make sure they graduate and help them define what student success looks like for those individual students. Davis is, like I said, a land grant university. And so we have profited. I don't know if you all have seen the article, Land Grab University. The UC system has profited from our university being on the homelands of the Patwin people. And so, like Karen had said, like we're putting the mirror up and saying, y'all need to look at yourself and look at what you've done and how can we move forward as a community? And we shouldn't be looking at numbers. We should be looking at our students as citizens of our tribal nations and how do we support those students. So I always push back on the data question. And shouldn't be part of the discussion. We should be supporting each of our individual nations of whoever we have at our institutions.
And I'll just add one more thing. When universities are so keen on numbers, Native American Studies classes completely fill. We run wait lists all the time. And that's as a predominantly white institution. And we really frame our work as building space for everyone, that because what's important to Indian country is important to everyone, that what benefits Indian country benefits everyone, because these are the only lands that we have. And if we don't manage these ecosystems in ways that sustains them, none of us are going to have drinking water. None of us are going to have clean air. And then, Gonzaga, we have a Center for Climate, Environment, and Society who brought Robin Wall Kimmerer to an event. She did an online event for us. That online event had 6,000 viewers, and another 2,000 people watched it during the week that it was up subsequently. And so even though we don't like to rely on numbers, it's great for us to have those numbers to say, okay, so a MacArthur Genius Fellow whose work has been recognized as being so critically important, won this long-term award. And at our tiny university, relative to state research universities, if 6,000, 8,000 people found her, that tells you that we need this content and that people respond to it.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Karen, and Laurie. And now I would like to introduce Shayla Bischoff, who is the assistant to the AVP of Undergraduate Studies here at MSU Denver.
Thank you, Nevaeh. I just wanted to give everyone, it's like a 5 to 10 minute, it's a break, so go use the restroom and everything. But I also want to point you to these post-its that are around here. If you got an agenda, you may have gotten some post-it notes on there. That's to kind of like write down your answer to whichever one of these questions.
Okay. So we are going to start and go ahead and get into our questions here. And if we could do probably 2 to 3 minutes per guest, just to leave room for questions at the end, because I know we have some students who are interested in questions. So our first question is, in a perfect world, what administrative structures would the university have to support Native students and support programming effectively? I see everyone thinking, so I'm going to let you guys think and then go ahead and answer. In a perfect world, what administrative structures would the university have to support Native students and support programming effectively?
So I'm a senior advisor to the president and on her cabinet, but in some of these higher ed institutions over the last 5 years, they've added like vice president level and senior vice president level folks. I'm actually really glad I'm not called a vice president, because that means I don't have to go to a bunch of meetings I don't care about, but yet I still have access to all of the same people when I need them. Hierarchy matters and title matters in universities. It's the weirdest thing, but it's like this big high school clique, right? Your title matters. And so that was my one thing I insisted on, is being a part of the cabinet. Um, and I alluded to it, or I talked about it earlier, and I'm going to reiterate it. It can't be dependent on one person. I really think that infrastructure needs to be developed throughout all of your institutional units. In our case, each of our campuses and then the colleges within those campuses. I get calls all the time from, professors and researchers, they want to do tribal outreach. And it's like, I can't do that for 12,000 people. I do that for the president. You need to build that infrastructure within each of your colleges. And the reason you need to do that is because tribes are relational. You are not to show up when you're ready to put in that grant. That's extractive and predatory. You need to build the relationship and have your research and job actually be driven by perhaps best practice, what the tribes actually desire and need for their own governance and caretaking. But you have to build the relationship first and have the trust and get consent. So to that end, we're actually doing university policy around research guidelines, but structure-wise, support, the ability to build the relationships, that needs to happen both up the chain, but then laterally across the organization as well, in my point of view.
Very similar to what Karen's saying. Um, I would like to see staff, faculty, Native folks in many of the positions across campus. So not just one person who's doing all the work, but multiple people in those positions to be fully funded, full time, not wearing multiple hats. That's just what they do. They're in financial aid, or they're a faculty, or they're living in residential housing. So many more staff and faculty would be amazing. I think I would also like a university to indigenize itself. So coming from the lens of a Native folk and the work that they do, as well as understanding the homeland history of the land that these universities are on. So acknowledging the homelands and acknowledging the history and it being taught just like a history course that many of us have to take to graduate. So homeland history for us would be homeland history of Patwin people, and it just be part of the requirements. And then providing support services for our students, fee waivers, not just tuition. Right now, we have a tuition waiver on our campus, but as well as waiver for housing, so living on campus and all the other fees that our students pay for. So it's multiple approaches, not just one. Again, according to wherever that university sits, you would develop these things. But for me, I'm really trying to indigenize UC Davis. So again, coming from the lens of a Native person would be one of the biggest things. Thank you.
I think an enormous challenge for universities these days is that administrators come and go all the time. And this is now like a revolving door profession as administrators move up and move on. So the challenge with building infrastructure in a university is getting an administrator to stay long enough to make sure that those positions are funded indefinitely, instead of saying, we're going to try it for this year. This will be an interim position. And part of that, in my opinion, begins with the Board of Trustees, because at our university, the Board of Trustees really sets the budget, sets a lot of the budget parameters, and sets a lot of the strategic growth planning. And so at my university, have talked a lot with development. They don't really want to talk with me so much anymore because I keep saying to them, they're coming to me and saying, how can we get tribes to give more? And I said, it's not tribes' responsibilities to support this university. It's this university's responsibility to support tribes. So if you think you're going to go out to a tribal council meeting and get the tribal council to give you money to give away to other students, you're going to be disappointed because tribal education funds support tribal students. And there are tribes, of course, that have foundations, right? The Kalispel tribe has a foundation. The university, my university, had the opportunity they got a large donation about 12 years ago, and they could have used that for academics, and instead they chose to use it to build the basketball stadium. And so, because that's much more exciting, right, to the public. And so part of it is developing these administrators that share our values. And so it is important, everything that Michelle and Karen have said is important. And Karen's point about having cabinet level positions is important. But I'm sure many of us have the experience of having the same conversation over and over, where the administrators say, oh, that's interesting. Well, let's follow up on that. And then 6 months later, we have the same conversation and they take the same set of notes. And so part of it is looking for the administrators that you want, keeping the administrators so that the administrators will keep the faculty, will bring in the right kinds of students, and holding boards of trustees accountable to participating in these processes as well.
Quickly, I'm just going to say, number one, we successfully had a Native person on the Board of Regents here, which was super nice. To Michelle's point, and that set of regents has been trained around a history of federal Indian policy and tribes of nations. I've said directly to anybody who's talked to me about money, it's like, tribes will not pay you to fix your racism. That's your responsibility. I linked in the chat to the Truth Report, which was part of a Mellon grant to look critically at the university around equity issues. And a nice chunk of that money was given to tribes to research and write their own history in their own voice from their perspective with the University of Minnesota. And it talks about how the land grant institution came about, the role of the early regents in the displacement and genocide of Dakota people. It talked about research relationships, and it's been a tough couple of weeks here at the University of Minnesota because you have people having to confront the role of this institution and its treatment of Native Americans. And I'm sitting here as you know, an internal advocate saying, oh yeah, I'm going to run fire with all that guilt because they don't know how to handle all the feelings it's giving them. And my standard response in the last 2 weeks has been, you like talking about our historical trauma. You won't talk about our contemporary trauma. And now you're getting a teeny taste of what it feels like, and you don't know how to handle it. You try to survive in this institution as an Indigenous person, knowing that this is your history. Now you know, they knew all along. And it talks about the Permanent University Fund. They created wealth in this institution and continue to benefit from Native folks. So, to both my panelists' point, there's a moral and strategic imperative for how we view these things. You could call them reparations. That makes people crazy, but it also, for all of us having to have these conversations over and over, it kind of makes the case for why there should be some institutional investment and that longevity and placement at a level that, faculty don't change. They get tenure, they like to stay by and large. Retention there is better, but how do we embed the work? But I feel that what Laurie said about, kind of administrators moving around, it's been a tough few years in higher ed, and you've seen a lot of movement, including the president of the University of Minnesota. So I'm going to have to catch the new one coming in, whoever that is, and indoctrinate them early, and get their commitment to continuing the work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Our second question for you all is, what challenges have you each faced related to university communications with tribal leaders, elders, and finding financial support for your programming?
So I facilitate President Gable's communications 3 times a year directly with tribal leaders. Um, and that's a commitment that's been made from the institution. Um, I'm hoping now that this truth report is out that we can focus the tribal leadership on kind of forward vision, that we can kind of maybe quit talking about like how much we've sucked for 200 years and actually look at something that advances the institution. And, that's frustrating, right? And it's kind of demoralizing to kind of sit there and be someone who's been there for 6 years. But because you're the first one that's being willing to be in relationship and conversation, you get all of the crap, right? And so I've had to tell President Gable, it's not you personally. You're just the first one that's been willing to hear it. Let them get it off their chest, right? Well, now she's leaving. So we're going to need to figure out how to, maybe in this interim, I'm going to take some time to work with tribal leaders and kind of develop that kind of proactive agenda, and kind of that value add. So, I mean, that's the tough part for me is I end up being the tribal whisperer, right? And having to say, here's what they said, but here's what they meant, and here's why they said it, and explain the anger. And then I have to go back to the tribal leaders, and be the university whisperer to them. And so, to anybody Indigenous doing this work where we're trying to advance the institution, everybody should know that for me, I think the most difficult part of it is making nobody happy. At any given point in time, Indigenous peoples and tribes might be kind of unhappy, administrators might be happy, they just switch places on a regular basis. But we're the ones having to broker that and kind of take that on.
I always say this is hard work and heart work because I hear you, Karen, in terms of just navigating both sides, right? And trying to make sure they're communicating and trying to make everyone happy. It's hard. And being a tribal person, right? You're obligated to support your responsibility to move things forward and you're working forward for your cousins, your aunties. Like if you mess up, you're known in the community as that person. And so for me, I'm Davis. Anything that happens at Davis wrong, they're coming to me, or in the community, something that happens to the community is related to Davis, I'm responsible for it. So that communication is critical, and you have to be on point. And many times, again, you're not making anyone happy. But one thing I've done at Davis is um, we have a lot of issues, so Native American graves and repatriation, and we're working through that right now. And so a lot of the conversation over the past decade has been around repatriation. And so we got to a point where I think the tribes and the campus are in good talking terms and things are being repatriated finally. And so we're in a good space hopefully by 2025, everything will be given back. Um, and so I really pushed the university to focus on that and not try to do anything else, not go for funding in any way. And once we get that done, then we will be in a good relationship standing where we can then start talking about what are our next steps. And also helping our researchers, broker between our researchers and the community, like don't go out there too often. And how you go out there is going to be very important. And when you're talking with tribes, and so just trying to have the university work on the more negative thing. And then once we get in a good relationship on the positive side, we can work toward establishing better programming. And then in regards to financial support, um, so my program is fully funded by the university. We're not a line item. I'm not looking for grants. So we haven't had issues with funding for programs. And so I think that's important to have a set budget and that cannot be tapped into or used for something else, but really fully funded in whatever that looks like for whatever services that you may have.
So as a faculty member, my role is a little bit different. I don't have I have zero authority to speak on behalf of the university and the university administration. And I also make it quite clear to the university that I am one person, one Native person, speaking about what I observe, what I have heard from my friends, my cousins, people in the various tribes about what they think is important. But I am not the expert. I am a person who has knowledge. And in the same way that I emphasize that tribes are nations, the university wouldn't go to the state of Washington and say, tell us what Washingtonians want, right? So universities can't go to tribes and say, tell us what tribes want. As a private institution, again, it's different. So we don't get any state education funds. That also means that we don't have to follow the same kinds of rules and processes that state institutions do. For example, many of the universities here in the plateau, Washington State University, University of Idaho, Eastern Washington University, have MOUs with tribes, with the regional tribes. Gonzaga does not want to do an MOU with tribes because it worries about ceding any sort of control for the university's direction. So that right away tells tribes that the university doesn't want to be a partner in the same way that other universities do. I have had many conversations about this. There is no movement on that decision. So in my role as a faculty member, that's where I direct my engagement with different knowledge holders in the different tribes. Come into our classrooms, come and give public talks. Show us all of the things that you know and let us reciprocate with you, right? I have reciprocal, responsible relationships with folks. And the university then, I think, is able to observe, oh, so if we want to think about Columbia River ecology, we can talk to folks at the Upper Columbia United Tribes. That organization is an independent organization, but it's supported with funds by the five tribes, excuse me. So that organization works with the state of Washington, with Spokane County, with other counties, with the city of Spokane. And so those kinds of organizations, the Salish School of Spokane, which is a Salish immersion school for K-8. They allow me to demonstrate ways that folks within our university can build capacity with tribally serving organizations without calling on the tribes to do our work for us, right? And then it elevates the work that those tribally serving organizations do. So my approach to that as a faculty member is a little bit different than Karen and Michelle, because I don't have a university administrator kind of presence. I have a College of Arts and Sciences level presence, and my responsibility as a researcher is through that Indigenous lens of responsibility, reciprocity, decolonizing, indigenizing. That's my research practice. So those are some of the ways that I manage it in meaningful ways within my capacity.
Thank you so much to our panelists for answering those questions for us. And now we would like to open it up to a Q&A. So if there's anyone in the audience with any questions. Okay.
So I actually have two. They're two separate questions, but they're all basically dedicated to the institution itself. So as I mentioned before, I take all my online classes. Next year I am expected to graduate in spring. My only issue, and I guess this is why I'm seeking advice, is because I like to be proactive instead of reactive. So I'm already scheduling my fall and my spring semester to make sure that none of my classes, you know what I mean, kind of have any time conflict. However, the conflict that I'm having is the one class that's offered for the required. So they give you like a list. Obviously, you guys know this. You work in the colleges, but they give you a list of like courses you can take. And so I went and looked, and none of those courses that they offered are even offered in the fall. There's one class that I can take, but I can't take that because it has a time conflict with the one class that I have to take for Chicano studies that isn't being offered in the spring. So my question is, what do I do in this sense where I'm like, I'm trying to graduate on time. I'm not trying to wait another fall semester because they wanted to hold off on the classes and they wanted to wait to get somebody in. Like, I even went as far as reaching out to my advisor. My advisor didn't answer. Okay, I'm going to go through the anthropology department and see what I can do there. I went and had a conversation and I sat down with one of the ladies in that department, and she was just like going through with me on what they offer in spring, what they offer in fall. And she was like, well, what we have for spring isn't even up yet. So now my progress is either going to be delayed or on time, and it's a probability thing until they figure out what's going on in spring. But like one of the classes there's only like what 3 or 4 classes that are Native American studies like focused in anthropology, and one of the classes isn't even offered because the professor who used to teach it isn't even here anymore. So how do you go about asking about these courseworks that they offer? Because you guys expect us to take this, you ask us, you have all of these degree progress reports and all of this, but then the classes that you offer aren't even being offered because the professor isn't there or no one has the capacity to teach it. And then that puts us off where now I have to wait an extra semester just to graduate, and I expected to graduate in 2024. So kind of just like advice in that sense. But then also, how do we trust the institution? I get they're trying to be proactive, but it's a lot of reactive stuff. Just recently they found remains of a Native American tribe. And being it was being hosted in, I guess, the anthropology department in itself. And they've had these remains for years. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I get that we're trying to learn about our people, but at the same time, we're not examining white bodies when we're talking about, you know what I mean, white history and the white saviorness of what's going on. Like, how do we also trust the institution in that when it's like, you guys do a lot of diversity and inclusion, but then also things like that happen where it's like you're examining our people to work in your work, I guess, in a sense, but then when it comes to budget cuts, we're the first department you want to cut off. So how do you instill that like trust with the institution, because it's one of those things where we're doing the work, but it seems like, in a sense, we're working with you guys, but it's also like you keep your friends close and your frenemies closer. So how do we make sure we're not a frenemy to the institution and we're actually a friend and they're actually an ally?
Michelle, you might be well placed to talk about NAGPRA.
I know a little bit. Again, it's so complicated and it's something I try to not deal with. So California, we have some state policy um, that that the UC, again, the University of California is a public institution, so we by law have to abide by policy. But this policy was established in like 1996, and so now, for 20 years later, they're finally all the our ancestors are being repatriated along with their cultural items. Um, it, it's complicated. It's not an easy thing. I think for us in California, the university is moving toward things being repatriated, but we're also working with the tribes. Some of the tribes are not equipped with taking back our ancestors, and so it's been a process, a slow process, to make sure that we're doing it in a culturally appropriate way, as well as ensuring that our tribes are ready to accept the ancestors. So it's complicated around repatriation. I don't know much about the curriculum. That is not my wheelhouse, so I don't know how to answer that one. So I don't know if that answers in terms of repatriation.
Um, I was involved around the edges of repatriating some ancestors and funerary items. I kind of pushed it over the finish line. Um, the only kind of maybe guidance or maybe current events that I can offer is the Department of Interior is coming up with is put out some updated rules around compliance with NAGPRA, and the office, the NAGPRA office, is actually getting very assertive. It would not be surprising to me if in the next couple of years you actually start to see them taking official action. So institutions who have any federal money, if they don't comply with NAGPRA, can have all of their federal money taken away. So the law has teeth. It has never been used. And I think that Department of Interior has kind of made the signal that they're kind of not messing around anymore. Um, so you could point that out, that compliance with NAGPRA isn't optional and comes at great risk to the institution. Or you can be silent and just wait for it to happen to them. And then, they like to have students have the consequences of their actions. Maybe these institutions need the consequences of their actions. And then I'm really so sorry. I personally can't help you regarding the issues regarding scheduling of classes and degree requirements. I've heard students running into that here, and they've gone to other campuses, but then lost credits within the university system as they move from campus to campus. But maybe one of the Desiree or somebody there can help you find someone who can help you a little better. Maybe you can take advantage of some reciprocity with one of the other institutions that you share campus with to get you what you need. I don't know that, but it seems like it might be worth exploring.
Yeah, that's the advice I have too. I mean, we do our scheduling about a year ahead, but it depends on faculty leaves. Maybe somebody went on family leave. We can't anticipate those things. So if there is a way to transfer in that credit from another institution and use your financial support at your university to fund that, that's worth asking.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you for that. I do want to clarify as far as our remains on this campus. They were registered in NAGPRA in the 80s. And so they were in the federal registry long before they came about. So we had a new faculty member come on. And when they were going through the inventory of their office, they found these ancestral remains. And they were already in the process of repatriation, because that's what happens when you when you enter them in NAGPRA. This person was also hired during COVID when they weren't allowed in the office. And then when they got back, they immediately left on medical leave. And then now they're here and are working on repatriating
these ancestors, and so they've not just been hanging around; they are in the process of going back. And as we know, this can take a very long time because the tribes are not ready or equipped to take them yet, or are even identifying who these ancestors need to go home to can be a really long and lengthy process. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out.
I think it's also important to note that NAGPRA is a federal law, but it contains no funding. So when tribes want to repatriate ancestors, items, they have to pay for that themselves. And institutions can choose to help cover those expenses, but it's not required. So the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture just repatriated a number of Alaska Native items, no ancestors because they didn't hold any, but items to one of the Yupik communities. And that was a 20-year process, in part because the community needed to make a plan to receive those, and it needed to find the funds to do so.
There is some money available through the NAGPRA office, National Park Service office. It is not enough to cover the entire cost whatsoever. I mean, the argument for institutional responsibility is you had the money to dig them up, then you find the money to put them back. And you've made a lot of money by having them, whether it's attracting professors, writing other grants, publishing, the caliber of your research agenda, no matter how heinous it was, all of those things. So they have benefited monetarily and otherwise from having those ancestors.
Absolutely. I just wanted to note that it's not as if Congress passed this bill and said, all you need to do is ask for the money and then you get it. The onus is on tribes. Once my perception based on what I've heard from my community is they feel the onus is on them. So that's something that I think is less visible to folks who aren't involved in that work.
Absolutely.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm Adriana Nieto. I'm a professor and chair of Chicano studies. So Liz is sitting here next to Liz. Lucky for Liz, I will waive any of our requirements so you can get your minor done. So that's one. I mean, not waive, but we'll do some creative substitutions if we need to. So honestly, that's another solution for students I know who are starting to leave, but find your allies and chairs in departments across the university, two of whom are, in this room right now. And so that also leads me to a question for our panelists about curriculum. And I'm not exactly sure how to phrase this without sounding like I'm being whatever, bitter, or because I am. Our Senate just tabled some handbook language about inclusive pedagogy yesterday, and I'm really upset about it because we are missing lots of opportunities to actually serve our students as we claim to. But so a sort of broad, open-ended question is about curriculum development. As someone who I have a major minor department, we're standalone. We have 5 full-time faculty. So we have some resources in terms of having Senate representation and having curriculum committee representation, sitting in the dean's meetings with as chairs. But I'm wondering about strategy-wise in terms of how to support curriculum development that is respectful and honors Indigenous pedagogies and that is not harmful. And that in some ways, you have to, the Native American Studies program is small, one faculty housed within political science. It's not its own entity. And so how do you navigate, for lack of a better word, farming out that curriculum to disciplines for whom faculty, it might be their secondary area of expertise, for example, or for some it's their primary and have already taught Native American Studies courses and have acknowledged the complicated and problematic relationship between who's teaching it and what the subject matter is. How do we as allies navigate and advocate for Native American studies that is grounded in the experiences of Native Americans. I don't know if that was a clear question, but
So I'm the only Native woman to have received tenure at Gonzaga University. I'm the first, and that was 5 years ago. There is a Native man who was tenured maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So we rely on our allies, right? The other Native person who's tenured at the university teaches in the School of Business. I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences. There are 700 Native women with tenure at four-year institutions out of 750,000 people with tenure at four-year institutions. So we have to rely on our allies, and we do. And this is part of building those trust relationships that I referred to earlier. Our process for faculty who want to cross list in Native American Studies is that they need to build a course that that includes Native perspectives, that uses Native authored materials, that relies on Native knowledge in these respectful, reciprocal, responsible ways. Gonzaga had the opportunity when we revised our core 7 or 8 years ago to include place as one of the methods that, or as one of the areas that the core wanted to focus on. It chose not to. That was a very narrow defeat for place. Because the whole narrative of Gonzaga is that it was founded by the Jesuits because they were committed to the Native peoples of the region. Gonzaga missed an opportunity to reinforce that and to live that with that core revision by not including place. So putting content requirements in a faculty handbook is tricky because there might be a faculty member who is excellent in many respects and doesn't have a facility for Indigenous fiber arts, for example. Should that faculty member be fired from the university because they don't? Faculty hiring is complicated. And I know I've said it before, academic freedom is important. So our university is experimenting with a lot of ways to support inclusive pedagogy. We have a Center for Teaching and Advising that is offering workshops for faculty. They are proposing a method of financial reward for faculty who do that. This is controversial because it excludes a population of people who feel committed to their teaching methods, which are not necessarily institutionally racist. So, so your question has a lot of complexity from my perspective as a faculty member and as a director of an academic program. Supporting faculty who are keen to engage by talking with them about their methods, about their approaches, about research that they could use is a great first place to start. I think the carrot is always preferable to the stick.
I just like to add, I think this is a long-term answer, right? I mean, yes, we would like to have more curriculum, but I think we as higher education institutions have to look at the problem. If there's only 700 women faculty, we need to increase that number. So what pathway programs are we having for our Native undergrads to go into master's and PhD programs? How do we support them to become the next step in faculty so we can then have a better pool and have more faculty members? I know here in California, those that were graduating, everyone was trying to pull from them. We have an ethics studies requirement in our CSU system. So people are fighting for our Native alumni to go into these faculty positions. So we as institutions have to start developing pathways programs to get our students into these positions.
Thank you so much. And we just want to thank Karen, Diver, for coming. We know you have to head out soon. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
And good luck to all of you. It's been said, and I'll reiterate it. This is generational work. I mean, these organizations are hundreds of years old, right? And their comfortable place is to keep doing it the way that they've been doing it all along. And when you challenge those norms, it's difficult, talking about, increasing the number of faculty. Well, you got to look at the tenure system, right? And people say, well, I did it, why can't they? But yet they don't have the burden of representation on all of the committees. They publish in journals that maybe aren't mainstream, but more geared towards the audience that will read them. And they place their value judgments on that, even though they're actually doing community engaged research and of value, right? So you have to challenge all of those notions of, and then people think it's an attack on, their credentials because or lowering of the standards, and it's just really not. It's pointing out where you have privilege. So all of those things kind of matter. And on that happy note, I'm going to go drive in the snow. Good luck to all the students in the room. Give them hell. We can't wait till you graduate and see the wonderful things you're going to do.
Thank you. Safe
Bye.
travels. Bye. I think we just had one more question from the co-facilitator here. So if you wouldn't mind, Michelle and Laurie, hanging around real quick.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, so what is the best thing that we as students can do to get administrators' attention? Obviously, my great friend here, she is frustrated as we all are. Like, I know I specifically, when I was looking for a new minor, I had to not choose Native Studies because I didn't want to potentially not graduate in 2024. And so to me, it's like, how do we get their attention? Because they got their degrees, they have them in their hand, and we don't. And they're kind of just sitting by as we have to keep waiting longer and longer to get our degrees. So what are your suggestions?
For me, I think it would be graduate. You need to focus on trying to graduate and we then go on to a master's or PhD or professional schools. And so in getting those degrees, whether it's an EDD, educational leadership, or become administrators, like those are important for you to graduate. I think we sometimes as students get stuck into changing the system or trying to make the system better, and then we get so involved and don't finish our degrees, or we are just barely getting a D plus just to graduate. Like Karen said, this is like institutional problems that have gone on and gone on. And for me, it's whatever you need to do to graduate from there and get your degree, that's going to be the most important. And to give yourself some leeway and some credit for the work that you all are doing and being leaders in the community. Um, and just finding some time for yourselves and being in mentally being okay, because this is hard work. Like I said, it's hard work and hard work. We as a staff, I've been in this for a long amount of time, and so many times I've been burnt out and so tired and feel like you're always fighting, you're going upriver. Just work, think about how you can be successful in different ways.
I think that's great advice. There are going to be so many times where you'll be the only Native person in the room, or the only Native person on a committee, or the only Native person in conversations that can have real impact. And that's a lot of weight to carry. There have been many times in the last 10 years building this program, and I'm very frank with my students about this. Like, I wish that I studied 14th century French textiles, because if I studied 14th century French textiles, it would be me and two other people in the world who cared about that. And we'd see each other every few years at a conference and talk about, the way that the weather in 1418 impacted the wool on the sheep, right? That is low stakes. Everything that we do as Native people in these positions is high stakes, just like everything that our tribal leaders do is high stakes. And in my community, we have there's a lot of fighting in my community. But those jobs are hard, and these jobs can be hard. But they're really worth it too, right? I get to have great conversations with you all. This is just a regular part of my day. And so I think the advice to graduate, to get that degree, is great advice, especially in this context of a university setting. I think the other really important advice is to have a plan. There is a book that I use in my Native American activism class called American Indian Activism, Alcatraz to the Longest Walk. And there's a chapter in there, a short chapter in there by Vine Deloria, who is very frank about, some people didn't want me in Alcatraz. Some people didn't like me in Alcatraz. And he, as one of the leading Native intellectuals, certainly of his era, is used to people disagreeing with him and being mad at him on all sides. But he talked about how the missed opportunity with Alcatraz was that they didn't have a plan, that they had all this momentum and they had all this public attention and they had all this support, but they didn't have a 1, 2, 3, 4 set of goals, realizable goals that they could achieve. And in that sense, once that public facing interests wore off, then the folks in that movement had fewer opportunities to move something forward than they would have if they had a tangible plan. And so I guess to all of you who are trying to get these initiatives going and get that momentum, build on the momentum of your recent tuition scholarship, have a plan. What is your next priority? What are you telling your administration you want it to achieve first? And put that achieving that goal on the administration. It's not on the students. The students' voices bring that imperative to light. Alumni can be very supportive of those student imperatives, but it's up to the institution to commit to it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So just for time's sake, because we're already almost like 10 minutes over, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came today. Thank you for staying. Thank you, DeFi, Gabe, Toby, who is the events project manager through this area that's helped us today with tech support. Dr. Makeley really was a huge part in, these conversations. And then also my colleague, Shayla. A lot of us, this has started over lunch conversation, right? And how we can bring this panel here. And I just really want to say I appreciate you and for all of your experience and your knowledge that you shared with us today. And I hope that, people in the room today can take a lot of what you said and really go forward and start really building successful programming here for our Native students because it is needed. And I just want to say thank you, Michelle and Laurie, for being here. And I cannot hopefully wait to check in with you later on when we're not too busy. But I think that's going to conclude our event for today. Thank you.
You'll never have a day that's not busy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cleveland, everyone.